Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to this episode of The Pursuit of Calling with me, your host, Thomas Carney. Here, I can sit down with Bethanie Martin. She's one of the coolest people I have ever met. She is a designer, but maybe not the kind of designer that you're thinking about right now. She designs neighborhoods and parks, and a lot of the time it's around climate action and post-natural disaster work. We talk a lot about how she sits down with community members to really figure out what the vision of a community post-natural disaster should be. We get into how she got into this kind of work, and it's kind of a really interesting story, and she tells a lot of interesting stories. So if you want to listen to this episode, buckle up because that's fantastic. But before we dive in, I want to ask you to send me a message. If you have any questions, or you want me to talk on a particular topic, or you just want to say some encouraging words, you can do so on Instagram or via the email that is listed in the show notes of this episode. All right, guys, see you in there. All right, guys, hey, how's it going? So, I am here with Bethanie Martin, and this was Leah recommended her during her recording. I asked her when she could record, and this is probably the quickest I've had a recommendation and then a recording, and it's really cool. So Bethanie, we talked a little bit throughout the week about what you do for work, and we were talking a little bit before the recording. But for those who don't know you, don't really know your background, could you give us a little short synopsis?
Sure. Bethanie, my 30-second elevator pitch. I'm originally from the east side of Indianapolis. I moved to Pittsburgh almost 6 years ago via Detroit, Michigan, so I'm a Midwest girl at heart. My background is in architecture and urban design and planning, so I currently work for a firm downtown Pittsburgh doing neighborhood engagement and planning work, and also climate action and resilience work, with a focus on communities and how they live and do life in the places that they currently exist. On top of that, fun facts, things that are not just about my job. I love the Lord. I spend a lot of time talking to Jesus, either in my hammock or in my double papasan chair in my living room. I have a 2-year-old Great Pyrenees who's a complete stubborn little thing, but she's as cute as it comes. What else? I love the people in my life. So when Leah called and made the recommendation, I was more than happy to sit here because I love people. I love getting to hear about their stories also. And so I'm just really honored to be here.
Oh, well, thank you for your yes.
Yes.
It's always great. This is the first time I've recorded with somebody that generally didn't really know beforehand. So that's even a testament to the podcast. I think is generally this podcast is called The Pursuit of Calling, and it helps me meet new people. Yeah. I was thinking about it earlier in the week. I was this one of the maybe we would have had a conversation at some point.
Yeah.
But this is how it gets to happen. This is how it gets to happen. I couldn't be more thankful for that.
Yeah.
We were, and I'm happy we were. You told me what you were doing with did for work both earlier in the week, because my brain would have broke today. And for those who don't know, just to dive a little bit more into that, just because I think it's really cool. People also probably don't know much about it. Could you go a little bit further into urban design and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I spend a lot of my time doing everything from production housing to disaster relief and recovery and all things in between. And so a lot of that looks yes, I have a degree in architecture and urban design. Architecture is the design of buildings. Urban design is the design of all the spaces in between the buildings. And then planning are all of the codes and requirements necessary to make those first two things happen. So a lot of my life exists between those three disciplines. And so that can be, currently working on the design of a really big 50-acre park in Cleveland, and also working on lots of large-scale city master planning related to equity and resilience. And so that manifests in a lot of different ways. But I think for me personally, at the root of all of it is sitting down, having conversations, not unlike what we're doing today, with people specifically around the design of the places that they live, work, and do life. And so sitting across from community members, sitting across from neighborhood organizations, hosting meetings in churches, talking to local leaders, etc., being like, okay, X person has X millions of dollars to work on a project. Let's talk about what it should be, and not, I'm going to go take my technical expertise, design a thing, and tell you what your community should look like.
Yeah. And guys, that's something I was talking about earlier with her before the recording. You might have heard this already from John Maxwell in his teachings. He talks about walking slowly through the crowd, and talks about you go where the people are, and the reason for that is so you can get their feedback. You can get you can see who they are, how they live their lives, and learn how to, from the leadership perspective, learn how to lead them more effectively. And this isn't too different.
Yeah,
it's figuring out how to really construct a vision that they would want.
Yeah, because the reality is, we were talking, I don't work in the place that I live. My firm is located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that's why I moved here 6 years ago. But I have worked in Northern California. I have worked in Texas. I have worked in states all across the country, and almost notably have never worked in the city of Pittsburgh or in the state of Pennsylvania. And so the reality is I don't experience on a day-to-day basis the places that I am working in. And as a result of that, while yes, I have the technical skill set and the professional degrees associated with doing my job well, I don't have the day-to-day lived knowledge and experience of someone who does their life in those places. And so rather than me entering into a community and saying, I know best because I can tell you with academic proficiency what you should do, instead, I want to hear your voice. I want to know, because ultimately, once the design of whatever plan we're working on is done, I am leaving.
Yeah.
I don't live there. And so I want you to have ownership. I want you to know that you have had a voice in what your community looks like. I want you to know that millions of dollars are going towards investing in the vision that you have and what you need from the place that you live in. And so that can be as simple as, what should housing look like that directly reflects Fort Worth, Texas, where I did lots of public housing work. Or it can look like, did a lot of work in Paradise, California, following the Camp Fire in 2018, which destroyed the town in 6 hours as a result of an electrical fire. And it was gone. Almost everything was gone. 20,000 structures overnight, just in an instant. Wow. And I didn't know Paradise before. I was only brought in afterwards. And so none of my academic understanding of natural disasters does any good in a place that has nothing left. And so sitting across the table from residents who lost memories and tangible photos of their lives, they know what Paradise looked like. It's all in their head and in their heart. And I'm like, I want to know that place, and I want to know what of that place needs to be here again in the future. And so that's the priority. That's the purpose of walking slowly through the crowd. It's like, I exist with a technical skill set, but your knowledge is sometimes even more important than mine is. And so what do I do to both productively extract that for what I do for a living, but also to honor those stories, to honor the life that you live where you do, and ensure that that is what gets elevated above all.
The only way I know how to respond to that is that it's really cool, because I mean, maybe some of you guys listening have thought about that before. That's that's not something I've ever really thought about. It's somebody's doing it. Somebody is designing the park, somebody's rebuilding after natural disasters, somebody's and it's not just one person, it's multiple. There's people doing these things, and it's great to know that there's people like Bethany who are taking these just taking people to heart, and saying, like you said before, like you love people.
Yeah.
And I feel like you couldn't do what you do if you didn't.
No, not at all.
So with this podcast being called The Pursuit of Calling, like what caused you to want, like what directed you to get into this line of work?
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'll tell a story.
Sure.
Because it gets to the heart of how I ended up here. I was an art major in college for a year before I ended up in architecture school. And so from what do I do well? I love to draw. I love to have paint and markers and pens and paper and all sorts of things. And so I thought being an art student was it. And I had a 4-year plan laid out. Mm-hmm. And then I got into college and started to have a tragic sense of, I don't want to do this, but I don't know where I'm going. And, looking back on a lot of the Lord's grace to lead me right across the street from the art building was over to the School of Architecture.
Wow.
But even for the first couple of years in the School of Architecture, from a traditional perspective, architecture is the design of buildings. Mm-hmm. And that's really fun. And it meant that I could productively use the creative side of my brain and channel it into something that was physically making a difference in the world. And so I was like, okay, well, I can get behind this. I can understand it. But it was my 3rd year in architecture school. As a part of the program I was in, every fall we took 1 week off of school and we traveled with our professor somewhere across the country. And it had something to do with that professor's interests or what we were going to be studying for the semester, whatever it may be. And so my professor at the time was really interested in social justice and really interested in the intersection of architecture, planning, and social justice, and how our industry has specifically created conditions that oppress certain populations and elevate to importance others. And so we went on a Rust Belt cities tour to Detroit and Flint specifically. And my dad had worked a lot in Detroit when I was a kid. It's, for all intents and purposes, basically in my backyard, living in Indianapolis, less than 5 hours away. But I'd never seen it, only ever heard stories. And my professor was like, I want you to read nothing on the news before we go. I don't want you to look up Detroit. I don't want you to look up Flint. We're just going to go. And I have conversations prepared for us to have when we get there. And so little did we all realize, but this was the start of the Flint water crisis, when so many of the pipes in the city were putting toxins into the water. And to this day, the city of Flint does not have clean, fresh water for the entire town because they are still trying to deal with rotting infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But so we get up to the town of Flint, and which is like 30 minutes north of the city of Detroit. And we get up there, and my professor had arranged for us to sit in this old church building and have a conversation with this police officer who had become a pastor at a church. And I'm fascinated because I grew up in the church, strong believer, and so I'm like, oh, well, this will be really cool to be in a church. I'm surrounded by classmates who don't believe in the Lord, who may not see the brevity of what we're sitting in front of. But I was like, that's fine. So we're sitting and having this conversation, and he had a member of his congregation with him who was there to talk to us about the town. And for those who have never been there or may not know, it's so desolate. There's so much abandonment. There's very few people that still live in the town. For obvious reasons, now the population is probably declining because of the water crisis. I mean, there's so many issues at hand. But people who have some have stuck around through all of it. And this member of the congregation was one of those. And so I remember after we'd listened to the police officer, and there's actually a documentary series on Netflix, side little plug, about the town of Flint. And several of the people that we met while we were there are in that documentary. And It's really cool to watch. But I was sitting at lunch with this member of the congregation. We were talking to him about what he does in his daily life in the city of Flint. And he owns a lawn. He's telling us, I own a lawnmower and I mow the grass at the church. And he was like, but there's this strip mall that's across from the church that's been abandoned for years. And so after I'm done mowing the grass at the church, I go across the street and I mow the grass at the abandoned strip mall that's across from the church. And he was like, then as I'm going about my daily business throughout the week, he was like, there's lots of abandoned lots in my neighborhood. And so as often as I can, I get out and I mow the grass at each of those abandoned properties as well. And I'm sitting here and I hate mowing the grass. And I generally hate yard work of any sort.
Yeah.
And so I, in my complete naivety, look at this gentleman and I was like, can you explain why? Like, why of all things do you mow the grass? Because it's hot. That doesn't sound fun. Like, I can't understand of all the things that you would do. That's your choice. And he was like, you know what? I own a lawnmower, which most of my neighbors don't, and our church doesn't. And if the property's abandoned for obvious reasons, there's no one designated to mow the grass. And he's like, but I own a lawnmower and I have some free time. And so I use my free time and the resources I have in front of me to make my neighborhood beautiful. And that's what I can contribute. And I think my neighborhood is a beautiful place filled with beautiful people in a beautiful city. And I want other people to see my neighborhood to look that exact same way. I want them to know that this is a beautiful place also. And this is what I can do to contribute to them being able to see my neighborhood as beautiful. And truly, I sat dumbfounded. Completely dumbfounded, because I was like, I viewed this as such a weird thing to do. And in his mind, this was the one beautiful act of love that he could show his community. And it was the one thing that he could do repeatedly to say, this neighborhood is worth love, my community is worth love, and I'm going to make sure that it's well loved. And I left the city of Flint that week and the city of Detroit that week, and I was like, okay, Lord, well then what is my one thing? What is the thing that you have given me the resource and the capacity to do to love people who deserve to be loved, to love communities that deserve to be loved, and to show that they are worthy of that love? And so for me, it just so happens to be that I really, really love people, and I really love sitting and have conversations with people, and I've been technically gifted in the world of planning and architecture. And so from that moment forward, there was this marrying of and this interweaving of all of these things that the Lord had given me to do this. And so it became my life's work to figure out how to do that in a profession that doesn't traditionally support this kind of work or this avenue. It's extremely small in the world of architecture and planning. And so I worked for nonprofits and I sat in circles with people who did this on a daily basis. And I called random people to get coffee because I'm like, you do this for a living, so how do I walk this out? And one experience after the next ended up now here. I think that trip was in 2014, I believe. So 10 years later, doing the thing I never could have imagined coming out of one conversation with a man who really likes to mow the grass.
That, oh, man. Like, guys, this is why I already said about why I like having guests, but like, that's not even like the piece of it. I was thinking like, don't talk about yourself. I don't want to talk about myself as much, but the things that like that you've seen, the people that you've talked to, like you went and reached out. You went and reached out to people you didn't know to find out things, just to find out things that you wanted to know about like, well, what you do now. And like, and relatively, I was thinking about the podcast. Like, if I just stuck with the people I knew about like for guests and like to figure out new things and things like that, like this, like part of it would be so much smaller. This podcast would be like, it's not like a huge thing right now, but it's like, for me, it's huge. It's like this thing I love to do. Yeah. And like, I don't know, I just think there's like whenever you're finding your passion and you're relatively thinking about like, maybe you don't know what you're passionate about, but then you're I think that, like this example of it, at least, and I don't think this is everybody's example, but like you just went out and you started like you start reaching out to people, the things that you wanted to know because you wanted to learn more about it, so you could do it, so you could do it and do it well, do it more effectively. And that's a big part of this podcast, because I went and do research and I looked at people that I knew, and I own a book now from this guy John Stange, I think. I think that was the wrong way to say his last name, but it's okay. Because I was invited to a Zoom call a few weeks ago, and he has multiple podcasts, put out multiple books, and he had like an open house Zoom call with a couple of people from our church are part of his group, and I was able to get advice from him, and it's so cool that you're able to we're able to do that. We're able to seek out these people to guide us to do the things that we want to be able to do.
Yeah. It was one of the questions that you had me thinking about before, of what are the tools and resources for me specifically that I've utilized or that help in the pursuit of my own calling. And for me, I actually probably shouldn't say this. I don't listen to podcasts all that often because I get really distracted listening to people talk while I'm at work, because I get so excited and invested in what they're talking about that I can't pay attention to what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I don't listen to podcasts super often, and I don't read from a self-help or self-development perspective as often, because a lot of it tends to be very career focused or very point in time focused. But I love people, and I think, I have an inflated sense of independence, and the Lord and I are working on it. And I think one of the things I've learned most as a result of that inflated sense of independence is that, in fact, the Lord equipped all of us differently. And put each of us for such a time as this. And that doesn't just mean I have to put my blinders on and I individually have to do the thing that I was called to do. And I have to focus solely on the Lord and I executing the thing right in front of me. But in fact, while uncomfortable as it may have been, it was a studio reviewer in my third year in architecture school who got me an internship when I lived in Louisville, Kentucky for 3 months. While most of my classmates were living at home and working in their hometowns, I randomly moved to a different state to go learn from this person who I knew for about 10 minutes before I moved there. And I went to graduate school in Detroit upon the recommendation of several people in my life who recommended this one small university that many people had never heard of, but had some of the most phenomenal professors who then shaped my abilities to do things like go spend 3 weeks in South Africa or do a human rights fellowship in Poland. And I say all of those things and it sounds like bragging. The Lord instrumentally put these individual people in my life to push these things forward. But that also requires the act of faith of, I have to get really uncomfortable to call someone and be like, hey, can I have coffee with you? Because your career sounds interesting and I really want to hear about it. Or, hey, such and such from the new firm that I work at. It's really uncomfortable to say that I'm ready to move from a place that I have worked at for the last 5.5 years, but you all are doing some really interesting work that feels really in alignment with where I feel like I'm going. Can we sit down and talk about it and figure out if there's a way that I plug in? Or, hey, youth students or young adults who I spend my time around, I will put myself out there as in mentorship opportunities, as someone that you can just use as a sounding board, as a person who's walking out their own life, who wants to hear what you are currently navigating and walking through, because that means maybe you have something to learn from the ways that I have stumbled in doing this, and maybe I have something to learn from the boldness of a 21-year-old that I could not have fathomed having when I was that age. It's all of these moments, and it's not to suggest that books and podcasts aren't helpful, because they are in the most beautiful ways, but the people behind all of those things are also so equally beautiful and accessible and oftentimes really willing to talk and have conversations. Even if it means sending some really uncomfortable emails. So
So guys, take that to heart. Like, I want to ask you something. Like, where did you get that confidence?
Oh gosh, it's really. I have had several conversations with people in my life about imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Because I don't feel like that confident of a person, to be completely honest and transparent. And so when most people reflect back to me, where do you get that confidence? How do you do X, Y, and Z? For a long time, it was an imposter syndrome struggle. And then it was the humility of being like, that's the Lord. And I don't say that lightly or easily, but it truly has to be, because I don't feel that way in my own strength and in my own ability. I certainly don't feel like that confident of a person. I get knots in my stomach every time I sit in my car outside of the coffee shop of the person who I'm going to go meet with that I randomly got the nerve to send an email to, and now have found myself walking out the life decision that I was hoping maybe I could just stay behind closed doors. And so it truly is the Lord is guiding those steps, and the Lord is walking that out, and I am the vessel by which all of that is happening, and taking to heart that reality of I don't have to equip myself with any confidence. I am not the strong one here. I am not doing this of my own volition. The Lord is opening doors, and I'm walking through them. And it's as simple as walking through the door of the coffee shop for a 2-hour conversation. It's also walking through the door of leaving a place that I had worked for 5.5 years that had largely become a huge piece of my identity. And the boldness and reassurance to do those things is that I serve a God who has been faithful up until now, who's won every battle before this. And I was reading something this week where they were like, if you feel like you're hanging on by a thread, at least make sure it's a thread at the end of his cape that's in the temple. And it's like, the Lord has won all of these victories. And that's where it all gets to come from. That's the confidence I get to walk on. I'm just hanging by a thread most days. I am just holding on to hope and a prayer and making it look like the world is a very confident place. But that's all his doing.
Wow. And that is like the polar opposite of what a lot of people would say. Like, it's like, where do you get that confidence from? Like, oh, I did these things, I do these practices, and they would talk about themselves a lot. And like, you give the credit to God, and I think that's great, because
it's not me,
right?
I stand in my own way if I try to fabricate it.
And I think like for me, like, I pray for confidence, I pray for guidance and hope, and all these things I know He has. And there's I work with my therapist even to like work on my confidence, and whenever I get those knots in my stomach, she gives me like some like mental practices to do, or like she's like, okay, go stand in that uncomfortable moment for just a few more seconds, and then like you've had to get out, and and I just I know that there's something like interesting, like, as you. I know this is kind of taking a little bit of a tangent, so I apologize, guys. But like, there's like something interesting about like as you walk out in confidence, like even if you're not fully confident, like it does. Like, you walk out in confidence and you see what happens. Yeah. Because like you had their knot in your stomach in the car, but then you went in and you had the conversation, and like maybe it wasn't during, but maybe it was after. Like, wow, that was great. Yeah. And like, man, I'm happy. I'm happy that like one, that like you have that confidence, but you have access to the confidence, like to the source of it. Yeah. And like, you're like, man, I'm happy. Like, it's great that I was able to do that, but it wasn't me. Like, it wasn't me. It wasn't me, because I would have stayed in the car. Yes.
And that's the slight twist of, I've walked into several of those conversations and felt like I had to be the one to muster all of the strength, and then walked out of them being like, man, the Lord is good. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, I would have stayed in the car.
Yeah.
I probably would have never sent the email. I would have never changed jobs. I would have never moved to the places I have lived in. I would not have done any of the decisions that I have quote unquote made up until this point. But the Lord knew that and made a way anyways.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it is glorifying to him to watch his people walk out what he has given them to do. And that, you know, when we talk about it in these big, yes, I have this really interesting profession and this is the calling on my life, and I put so much weight on that profession, it's like the Lord has equipped me for a lot of things that have nothing to do with my professional career, as beautiful as it is. And so if I put all of the focus on, well, my calling is only in this professional career, sometimes I won't even have those conversations because I'm so focused on this thing sitting right in front of me. And it's like, okay, Lord, I want to see holistically your picture. And that includes all of those people that you meet in coffee shops and all of those emails that you send and all of those open house Zoom calls that you're a part of and all of the learning and growing that we do that's fixing our eyes on Jesus and walking it out on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And it's okay that I don't have the confidence to do it because I have confidence that he does.
Yeah.
And that's all I need.
Right. Like, guys, I want to give you, like, when I go back at a couple of things that you said, but specifically for like the listener here, and like there's things that you want to do, right? There's things that like you want to do, that you want to seek out, that you have like this maybe this passion that like you don't know where it comes from, maybe, and you don't know how. But then at the same time, like I talked about this last episode, like you don't know where to start. You don't know how. You don't know where to. Like you don't know how to get more information. And like it's not. And it, like I do like that you said like it's not just in the books.
Yeah.
It's in the people who wrote them. And like we talked about going to the source. And like going to like you go to God, you pray, and like you can. But like we also go to the like who wrote the book. Go to the source of the book.
Yeah.
Like you go to that you can go to that person, and sometimes like. Maybe they won't reach. Maybe they're too. Maybe like they're busy. They can't reach out. Yeah. But like you also might just know the people. You might also just know people.
Yes.
Like you don't know. Like there's like for me like I want to have my own business. I want to have like I have this entrepreneurial mind. I feel like he's given me, and I know entrepreneurs who are very successful.
Yeah. I
have their phone number, and like that. And I wouldn't I wouldn't have like this is like. Maybe I don't know, but like I wouldn't have known them if I wouldn't have walked in the doors of the church.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have like had the confidence to even like, I didn't ask for the number. They were just friendly and like we had conversations, and then like, I don't remember how I got these guys' numbers, and like, or like one guy, Ed, Pastor Ed, was like, hooked me up with to like get food with him at one point. And like, I have all these guys' numbers on my phone, and like I'm kind of convicted because I haven't reached out to them in a while. And like just to spend time with them.
Yeah.
Like, how do they live their life?
Yeah. It doesn't always have to be. I want to sit down and extract all of this information about the one very specific thing that would help me grow, as much as it is putting yourself in proximity to all of who they are.
Yep.
Because I was. Having a conversation with a friend several years ago who was a former small group leader of mine, and we were going around the room talking about our biggest hopes and dreams. Like, what was this big, feels really unattainable dream that we have on our hearts? And she was like, okay, now I want to go back around the room and name the one step that you can take tomorrow.
That's great.
And it's a very simple act. And for me, a lot of it was putting myself in proximity, because I get bored Google searching and trying to understand how to carve my way in this world. But putting myself in proximity to all of who someone is, all of how they're walking out their daily life, I can glean a lot from someone's relationship to their family as a means for understanding what their professional life might look like, as much as I can glean a lot of understanding from how someone serves in the church and how that mindset impacts how they walk through their professional careers. And so it's not always this big, scary, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to ask you these 9 questions about your professional goals and aspirations so that I may learn how you got to where you are. But I think of, I did the Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation's Emerging Leaders Collaborative last year.
Okay.
And sat down with people like Mark Sorreo and others. And as beautiful as it was to listen to Pastor Lee and Mark talk about how they got to where they are today, step by step, I also sat at the feet of people who have beautiful testimonies of lives lived for the Lord. And it's simple things like learning in that leadership collaborative that at the time, I was both working for the church and also working at the firm downtown. And so I was living what I would refer to as like a dual professional life. I was working in a secular environment, and then I was working in a church environment. And the simple extraction of, let's remove the notion that one of your jobs is secular and one of them is not, and believe that all of it is on mission. Not just because you're not just in the church and that's the only place you can be on mission. You're on mission here also. And it's like, well, the minute that I elevate outside of this notion that only doing things at the church is on mission, or only serving is on mission, and that in fact the way that I walk out my professional career is on mission also, and that doesn't always have to be in the church. Now all of a sudden I've learned a lesson I never would have guessed sitting in front of people who also had very tangible lessons to learn about how to walk out their purpose in the world. And that would have, had I gone in the perspective that that's what I had to gain from them, never would have heard the other piece of it. And yet, I honestly think I learned so much more from the simple mind shift that they had around how they approach what it means to live out their calling. And so that alone, but that, you don't know those things without being in proximity to those people. So you can take the pressure off of it being this big, huge thing too, and make it as simple as, you've lived a life for the Lord. What do I learn from that? Also?
And like, and just to put some context, there's, for those who don't know who Pastor Lee is and Mark Sorrero, Pastor Lee is one of the founding pastors of Amplified Church in Plum. And then Mark Sorrero is the founder of a very successful bakery, Oakmont Bakery. And like you were saying, like secular versus non-secular, like it's like they're both for the Lord. And like it's, you wouldn't think like, oh, how are donuts for the Lord?
Yes.
and like,
or what does an architectural designer, someone who works in the planning world, have to learn from a man who owns a really successful bakery and the founding pastor at a church? Because any self-help book would tell you to go find an architect to talk to if you're going to work in the world of architecture. And instead, I'm sitting in front of a man who has built his life around one of the best bakeries I've ever been to, and a man who took a leap of faith to found a church. It's like, those are awesome. That's incredible. And yet, completely important resources that have nothing to do with what I draw for a living. So
no, that's beautiful. Like there's my mind went to like, there's plenty of successful people out there, like by the world standards, successful, like, as in like financially successful. They're doing plenty of people that are doing really well for themselves, but there aren't people that maybe you want to emulate. And there's, because you look at their success, I feel like a lot of people are like, man, what are they doing? I want to do what they're doing so I can be where they're at. And there's some credence to that, because like maybe they have a certain mindset shifts, but like then there's like, who are they at their core? And like, I don't want to like I'm not gonna put anybody on blast, but like there's I'll listen to people that are that don't have faith, that are very successful by the world standards, because they have certain practices that I can glean from, that I can get information, I can I can use that to grow, and I can apply it myself to my faith, and I can work. I can learn from that. There's I guess what I'm trying to say is like you want to be careful who you're choosing to be in proximity to.
Yep.
There's because this, it's funny because I say this a lot, but like this podcast is like, it's not like a I don't market it out there. I think it might be like a subcategory on this podcast. Like I don't market it as like a fully Christian podcast, but like because I'm a Christian with a podcast. That's kind of like I am like, and so like I don't have to like, it's not a something I'm like I'm not. I use the word calling, which is a very kind of Christianese word. Cause you look up the word calling on like Apple Podcast, and it's like all Christian podcasts.
Yep.
but I wanted to. God just comes up all the time. But there's all like God comes up all the time. You talk about like finding those people that are people with faith that not are successful because of what they built with the Lord. And it took that first. Like I've heard Mark's story before about like how they started to give more.
Yeah.
And then like the Lord and the Lord in their experience, and for them, like he started to give back.
Yep.
And he was like, so we just started giving more. and that's not like, he's not gonna give everybody like all, like financial like quote unquote freedom because they tithe, but you can also gives you things in other ways. Like it's not just a financial return. It's like it's a life. It's like things he gives you in your life. It's like how he grows you as a person. It's like these different like you said, like for like it's those thoughts of like, hey, I'm gonna email this person. And I'm gonna email this person. Or make this phone call, and I'm going to. You can stop me if like this is like sounding like if you think maybe something I'm saying can be confusing, I'm fine with being corrected. But like there's something
to be said about the way that the Lord honors the steps that we take with our eyes fixed on Him.
Yeah.
And it's, you are correct in saying that it doesn't matter. Like tithing is not so that we individually glean financial freedom.
Right.
If we view it that way, it's solely a prosperity gospel. In the same way that it's very easy to be like, okay, Lord, well, I'm going to do this thing so that you give me something in return. But I think there is evidence in Scripture and time again, a witness to what it means to walk out our life in partnership with the one who created us and to honor him with everything that we do, and checking our heart posture as we do all of those things. So am I checking my heart posture when I'm going into a moment to have a conversation at a coffee shop because I personally want to be more financially free and make more money in the world and have a career that is deemed successful by the world? Or do I want to honor a person that the Lord has created with their time and the talents and gifts that they've been given, to simply sit in front of them and ask questions and give them a moment to share their story and watch as the Lord uses their story to shape my perspective? And, when I think about tithing in the church, it's often that my heart changes.
Yeah.
As much as my financial position may also change, that is not near as extreme as the change in what it means to give with empathy and give completely free of any perspective that I have to hold on to something because it's mine to have, and that this is all the Lord is deserving of. And so I think it sums up in what is my heart posture as I'm having all of those conversations and entering into those moments and sitting at the feet of leaders that the Lord has put in front of me, and honoring the gift that He has given them, honoring the person that He has created them to be, and allowing the Lord to use that to have influence over my life, both tangibly in my career, because it certainly has, and also intangibly in the shifting of heart posture, in the way that I view the people that the Lord has created, the way that I walk every day.
Yeah. No, that summed up what I was saying really well. It's a heart posture. Another way to say it, I think, is foundation. Like, what are you building on? What are you building off of? But we'll leave that at that.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's I want to move into like we talked. One of the questions that talked about stresses and worries, and like what like whenever there's a time I think everybody has when like work gets stressful, and especially when it's something that you're really passionate about, it can feel sometimes really debilitating. I can't say the word. Debilitating. Yes. And so whenever that happens, like, what do you do? How do you manage that?
This is where I learned the art form of daily depending on the Lord, because not always responding the best. And I think I come from a profession that has a lot of daily stress. I come from a work environment that was extremely stressful up until a couple of months ago, and walking out the lived reality of, I have walked through a door that I feel like the Lord has opened, and that does not mean that it was rainbows and butterflies on the other side, or the grass being greener, or any of the fun phrases you could think of. And there are plenty of days in which I encounter stress or frustration at work or whatever it may be. And in those moments, it's this beautiful stirring of the enemy to say, now is when I'm going to pull you as far from the source of calm and the source of peace. And I'm going to give you this sense that you have to take all control, and that all of this is resting on your shoulders. And I say it's beautiful because it is truly this most perfect twisting of where I can be, where I should be, and what I have access to, and what I ultimately end up walking out. So in a lot of those moments, I end up sitting for a second being like, okay, well, I have to do X, Y, and Z, and I have to ensure that all of these things are done, and I have to manage these 4 people, and I have to clearly communicate to principals and bosses at work and say, you have overlapping responsibilities, we need to shift deadlines, and all of a sudden, I becomes the most common word that I use. And slowly my reaction time's getting better of like, oh, let's pump the brakes for a second. Let's sit in why I think that I am responsible for fixing this right now. Why do I believe that my entire work stress is sitting on my 2 shoulders? And take a second to pause. Because I think the enemy wants us stressed out. I think the enemy wants us in moments like that because it's ungodly confusing. It's extremely overwhelming to be in a moment where all of a sudden I feel like I am carrying the entire burden. And yet, time and time again, we see in Scripture, nope, that's not the point. I really don't want you to carry the entire burden on your shoulders. Instead, you're supposed to cast that at the feet of Jesus. Cast that at the cross that has already forgiven, that has already made a way where there was no way, that has already given you immeasurable peace. But the enemy doesn't want me to remember that. And stress is, for me, one of the easiest ways the enemy convinces me to forget all of that, all that I know. And that sounds like a very hyper-spiritual way of approaching stress in the work environment. But truly, when it comes down to it, if my constant thinking is focused on stress and focused on what I have to do in order to fix said stress, I am taking back control, and I am intentionally putting space between myself and the Creator that has made a way in this moment. Just because I have peace from the Lord does not mean that stress is going to go away. But my peace from the Lord adjusts my attitude. My peace from the Lord adjusts my perspective on what that stress actually means and looks like. That stress is not the end of the world. I spent most of my afternoon yesterday coordinating thousands of dollars of print material for public meetings next week in Cleveland. Truly one of the more stressful things I have done this week, to try and figure out how to get all of this done. And in every one of those moments, I was like, well, I have this to-do list to keep track of. I have these 2 interns and this landscape architect who are all doing work from me. I'm managing 2 bosses who are on vacation. And meanwhile, I have an entirely different project team who is questioning why I have yet to work on anything they have asked me to in the last 2 weeks. And I sit in that moment and I'm like, I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I can't accomplish this. Why did someone hire me to do this job? All are lies.
Yeah.
And all I need is 30 seconds to state out loud that all of those are lies. I need 30 seconds to take a moment and say, Lord, that's not from you. Lord, that's not from you either. Lord, that is a lie of the enemy, and I would like to send it back where it came from. And I would like you to remind me that you put me here, that you made a way for me to be here, that you have equipped me with everything that I need. And that does not mean I am independently equipped. That means I am equipped both myself and with the people that you have given me in order to accomplish what is in front of me. And that 30 seconds makes a world of difference. That 30 seconds changes what stress means and looks like. That takes the pressure off. That says stress is not my identity.
Yeah.
And again, sounds like a very Jesus answer. However, if I view it as an attack of my identity and not just I'm stressed out in this moment, what on earth am I going to do to get all of this done? It changes everything in that moment. And sometimes we do it really well. Sometimes we don't at all. Sometimes we need to go back to the Lord and repent for the fun vocabulary that we used as we were thinking through all of the things that we had to do in those moments of stress. And that's just vulnerability at its finest, to say we do not do it perfectly, and I certainly don't. But if I can take that time, if I can readjust my thinking, yes, I'm stressed, but I remember that the Lord sits above my stress. And so because I am seated at the right hand with Jesus as a result of being saved, I am also sitting on top of my stress. So I am a conqueror and co-heir with Christ. Okay, great. Let's remember all of that truth. Let's say all of those things that determine our identity and allow that to be how I walk out what those stressful moments look like.
Yeah. I think the one thing that we talked about a lot, like in the past with the men's ministry, was the in Ephesians, the armor of God, and it's remembering it's just like I'll tell myself sometimes, I'm like, okay, it's like not often enough, but like I have done it before. It's like, okay, let's put on the belt of truth.
Yes.
Let's just remember, like you said, just remember what the truth is.
Yes. The Lord didn't breathe the scripture into existence so that we could draw cute pictures of it and think that it's something we only need in times where the wars in our life feel the biggest.
Yeah.
We don't just need the Lord when things feel like nonsense is hitting the fan and our life is falling apart. I need the Lord maybe more walking through my daily professional career. Yeah. I needed the Lord prior to driving here today because my very adorable dog really was not fond of the idea that I was leaving the house and thought she should get to come with me. I'm like, nope. Okay, Lord, where's that abundant patience? Where's the fruit of the Spirit at the moment? Yeah. Because I need it right now as much as I need it in life's biggest and most stressful moments. And so, again, I like to think of it, the cute and adorable pictures help us learn it as a child, and that's beautiful. The ability to draw and have visual representation of the scripture is so important and something that has personally changed my life. But it isn't always just the cute and adorable pictures. It is, well, I need it every day. I got to put it on every day, and I got to make the choice to put it on every day. And I got to make the choice to use it in those moments. I think it was Brandon during our Ephesians study, Pastor Brandon at Amplified Church. I realized maybe could have just said more clearly, that is how Thomas and I know each other. So I use these as very quick things. But Pastor Brandon at Amplified Church, I think as a part of our Ephesians study, was talking about the fact that we don't just wake up and decide if we're going to worship.
Yeah.
We wake up and decide what we're going to worship.
Yeah.
And so I think the same thing is true of, I get to wake up and decide not if I'm going to let God have control, but what I'm going to let God have control of. Am I going to let the Lord have control of all of it, or am I going to give him a little bit and I'm going to take this little bit and then I'm going to succumb to the enemy having that little bit over there.
Yeah.
And so that means daily I make this decision. Daily I put it at the feet of Jesus. And putting it daily at the feet of Jesus does not somehow mean that I have failed as a believer.
Yeah.
It means that I have reverence and understanding of who my Savior is.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Great.
But
No, that's awesome. And this will be, I want to ask you one more question before we move into the final questions. Just as a nice wrap up, based off of our conversation and pursuing calling, stress, and we didn't get into the identity question, but you did touch on it. What kind of advice would you give to somebody that is looking to pursue, they want to pursue something, and maybe they're worried about their identity. They don't know. Maybe they're stressed out in, like, you know what? I'm just gonna let you interpret that.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
I think my biggest point of encouragement is just to allow yourself the ability to relinquish some of the stress that you are undue putting onto what purpose and calling. These are big words.
Yeah.
And we prioritize them sometimes in very negative ways. And this is not just in the church. This is in most industries, prioritizing professional advancement and saying that everything that you do is somehow going to impact your ability to have the career that you want and shape your ability to have this next promotion or this next title or whatever it may be. And as a result of all of the factors around us that suggest that these are heavy things to carry, we begin to assume a position of, well, I have to carry it all myself. And so somehow every conversation I have has to point me to what my next step is professionally, or every move that I make has to be advancement in some way, or, you name any one of them. And we put so much stress on it because we somehow think that all of a sudden it's all on us to do this, or everything that we do is going to have some impact on this thing that we have in front of us.
Yeah.
And we got to let go of some of that. I know we didn't talk a lot about identity, but a lot of my professional career for the last 5.5 years caused significant identity issues because I was putting so much pressure on what people thought of me because of this really cool thing that I do. And if I didn't do this really cool thing anymore, was I worth anything to begin with?
Yeah.
And if I don't have this really cool thing as a part of my life and this really small firm that is this picture perfect vision of what everyone thinks my professional career should be, well, if I don't have that anymore, what am I worth as a person? And that's a lot of unnecessary pressure to put on a job, truly. And all of that was man-made stress. Every last bit of it was me taking into account opinions that were not as important as my Savior's. It took into account me having a lot of control and me being able to achieve what everyone else said was perfectly crafted for me.
Yeah.
And I do think the Lord made me for such a time as this. I do think that the Lord gifted me and equipped me with what I need to walk out this specific job that I do on a daily basis. And I would be remiss to not say I am extremely grateful and humbled that I get to do this thing. But if I allow myself to suggest that that's where everything comes from, I've completely negated the point of salvation.
Yeah.
I've completely negated the gospel in an instant. And that stress has to get removed. We have to quit tying our identities to big words like purpose and calling, because we were just talking this week about the fact that we're all called to be preachers. That doesn't mean I need the title preacher in order to do that. That means that I am equipped and called to also bring people into glory someday. That I have the responsibility to share who the Lord is with someone, as much as I have the responsibility and burden of sitting in my professional life and ensuring that every resident I speak to has a voice that's elevated in the design process. As much as I hold responsibility and weight and caring for the people that are around me, as much as weight and responsibility as I have at serving at the church on Sundays and at youth. Like, these are all pieces of our calling. These are all moments of purpose that we have, that we get to daily decide to walk out. And if I put stress on one bucket of that and something crumbles, all of a sudden my identity is in question. All of a sudden my worth is in question. And that's only one piece of an extremely beautiful picture. And we have a lifetime to learn what that picture looks like. We have a lifetime here on this side of heaven to walk with Jesus and uncover each little bit of it. And I don't want to miss any of those because I was too busy saying, I have a lot of pressure in order to have a 9-to-5 job that is my purpose, because there's so much purpose and calling to be had outside of that 9-to-5 also. And so just take the pressure off. Relieve yourself of the worry and stress that comes with the word calling, to say, okay, Lord, well, what have you called me to today? Okay, Lord, what am I doing today in my job, outside of my job, in the lives of the people that I love, that you've put in front of me to steward right now, in the people who don't know you yet? And let that be the thing that brings joy. Let that be the thing that expands our opportunity and our understanding, so that there's a lot less pressure if I leave my job after 5.5 years. It was a beautiful experience, and I would not negate for any reason the way the Lord used my job for 5.5 years. He's doing something equally as beautiful now in a completely new place, and that's okay. And that's actually a really great thing. So, but that comes with, I'm repeating myself, but all that stress, just back it off a bit. Get it out of the picture and allow yourself to see all of who you are as a result of all of who Jesus is.
It's great. And I really appreciate, I just appreciate you being here, like I said in the beginning of the episode, but there's, I really appreciate the way you phrase things. And I feel like you talking with people so much probably really helps you, like, be as good of a speaker as you are. I find, like, I'm sitting here and I hear people talking, like, I'm jumbling my words and all this stuff, but like, it's even like my identity is in this podcast. It's like, if this podcast for some reason ends, like, that's okay. Like, I don't want it to, but like, if it does, then it does, and like it would be a and I'd still be a child of God. And you kind of summed that up well. So I like to end every episode with just 2 questions, really to get I know you said you don't listen to a lot of podcasts and stuff like that. So
I know. Sorry.
So, no, you're good. It's okay. There's, I know I always ask people, like, what kind of resources do you, I know we talked about that even a lot already, but whether it's a physical resource or whatever you want to say, what kind of resources could you direct people towards to pursue, to help them with their calling and leadership, whatever. Mm-hmm. Like it's the floor's yours.
Love that. I really bad at finishing books also. I have a whole stack on my bookshelf of things that I have started, and I see Lead Like It Matters on yours, and I have that book at home. I think I was given it for Christmas as a part of our staff Christmas gift exchange last year. But I've read really beautiful snippets from people like Judah Smith and oh gosh, I can picture the cover of this incredible book that takes stories from the gospel and doesn't rewrite them, but it walks them out in a way that just like helps paint really lovely pictures of the intentionality behind scripture. We have a lot of scripture translation issues, and so when you think about things like reading the Passion Translation in conjunction with something like the NLT, I love reading things like the Passion Translation because it tries to get to the emotion and the heart behind scripture. And so I can think of all of these half-read books that I also don't remember the titles or authors of, which is so not helpful in this moment. So I'll just repeat the earlier statement of just get plugged in. Put yourself in proximity. And so that sometimes means jumping on Zoom calls with a bunch of people you may not know, with a podcaster that you really admire. That may also mean getting plugged in a local interest group or your church small groups or whatever else. There are groups of people doing all sorts of unique and creative things all over the place. I spent a summer in Detroit painting murals with an organization called Summer in the City. We would design murals, we'd draw them up on the wall like giant paint by numbers, and then we would bring in high school students to take a red Solo cup filled with paint, and they would have to match the color of the paint in their cup to the color of the paint on the wall in this area that they were supposed to paint. And I spent all summer doing this, and it was really just a great way of getting to know the city of Detroit. A city that I had just moved to, that I knew nothing about because I had to drive all over the place to all of the sites that we were painting. And that has nothing to do, seemingly on the surface, with anything about pursuing my calling, anything about purpose-driven life. But I live in this city now and want to get to know it. And so that's how I get plugged in. And that's just another way of being in proximity to people and resources and things that you love, and exploring gifts and talents that you have that you don't get to use on a daily basis, and allowing yourself the freedom to do those things and do them with the Lord. Do them, walk out every moment of like, okay, Lord, I'm going to go hammock now with you in the park, and I'm going to explore this new park I've never been to. And that can be equally as valuable as, okay, Lord, I'm going to do the uncomfortable thing and send the email. Sometimes that means starting with a Google search, and Google's great. It'll tell you all sorts of people that exist in the world that do things. Sometimes it is just, where can I go to explore some other part of me? But put yourself in proximity. That'll be my sum up statement.
That's great.
And if that means putting yourself in proximity to bookstores, if you see me in person, ask again, and I promise I will remember whatever books I've half started. That might be helpful.
I'm gonna sum it up with, you already summed it up, but I was like, get plugged in, guys. We're not meant to do life alone. So
my first night serving at youth, I met a student who wants to be an architect.
Wow.
I was like, that's random. Thanks, Lord. All because I'm at youth. Like, just get plugged in.
That's great.
There's so many good people in the world.
And then, so you say you don't listen to podcasts, but now that you know, you've got a feel for this one, who would you recommend as a guest to be on?
Mel McFarland.
Okay.
I apologize because I don't listen to podcasts very much if you've already spoken to her, but Mel McFarland would be at the top of my list.
All right.
When you think of someone who has laid down one very distinct path of life to pursue what the Lord has on her heart, she's a really interesting story.
That's great. Thank you.
She's fantastic. He's also just one of my favorite humans. So, but.
All right. Well, guys, thank you for listening to, I think now they keep getting longer and longer every single episode.
Thanks for sticking it out.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Pursuit of Calling. The first time I got to say that. And guys, if you haven't already, give this podcast 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you can review. And I just found out recently that on Spotify, it's not called reviews, it's called just leaving a comment. So if you guys want to leave a comment on this episode, that would be fantastic. It really helps with getting this podcast out there, because it tells the algorithm that people listen and people are interested. And then what also helps a lot is you can just share this podcast out on this episode if you really found it interesting on social media. That'd be fantastic. So guys, thank you again, and I'll see you next time.